Hi class, we need to take a look at another set of problems that we can actually solve by using proportions. Now, I'm going to do the first one as we did the previous ones that involve percentages, and then the other two will do using proportions. So if it's not requesting you to use proportions, this is just a simple way of doing this problem. In this case, they're referring to a number, so I'll just declare the variable let x is equal to a number. And remember that what we did here was that we turned the sentence into an equation. Is represents the equal sign, of represents multiplication. So if we do this one by setting up an equation, in this case, the equation will read as follows. This one says one number, so that's going to be your x, so in this case, x is equal to, and technically 35% of means multiplication, and then this will be 250, or x is equal to 0.35 times the values of 250. They do want us to punch it into the calculator. So in this case, 250 times 0.35, it's equal to 87.5. So x is equal to 87.5. That's going to be our solution. Remember that when the problem states to use a calculator, you're going to carry out the calculation and then make sure that, well, basically you're writing out the calculation. In this case, after we punch it into the calculator, we're obtaining the 87.5. Since this is technically a word problem, we would actually set it up as a sentence. So in this case, the number is 87.5. Or you could also rewrite it as 35% of 250 is 87.5. So 35% of 250 is 87.5. Either one of these two word problems typically have as a formality that we're writing them as a sentence as we're concluding the problem. So if a problem doesn't say to actually solve it as a proportion, you can do what we did in the past, and that was by setting up an equation. In this case, you're transforming the sentence into an equation. When they mention the word is, you simplify that by equals, of changes into multiplication, and then, well, x will be the variable as we have it here already set up as x is equal to. So this particular one was a lot easier to just do it as an equation. Let's take a look at another one where we're setting up a proportion. And remember that a proportion, it's going to be just some set of, well, fractions equaling other fractions. So this is what they're looking for, except that if you're working with percentages, you're gonna have to set up the following fraction as part of the percentage. So give me just a second. Okay, sorry for the delay. I had it on a different file. So this is the proportion that we're referring to if we're working with percentage problems and they want you to set it up as a proportion. Remember that a percent technically represents some sort of an x over 100, and this is because percentage represent pieces of 100. So for this particular problem, they still are talking about a number. So I'm just going to say let x is equal to a number. And then I'm going to set up the proportion as follows. So we know that they're asking for 45 is 30% of what number. So they're already talking about 30%. So that has to be technically acknowledging the proportion. So that's going to give us a fraction, and 30% represents technically 30 over the values of 100. That's what 30% represents. And then they're asking for 45 is 30% of what number? So technically, this has to be equal to 45 over the unknown. And let me just double check. 30% is 30 over 100. 45 represents a ratio over a number. This is the equation that we're solving. They're a little bit harder to visualize in this format, but it turns out to be the same. Now, to solve this particular one, what I'm going to do is cross multiplication. And let me put the variable on the left. So in this case, we're going to end up with 30x is equal to 45 times the values of 100. And then I'm going to divide by 30. So we're looking at x is equal to the values of 45 times the values of 100 divided by the values of 30. And then before we evaluate it on the calculator, let me cancel one of the zeros. So we're looking at 45 times the values of 10 divided by 30. Whoops, no longer 30, divided by 3. And let me evaluate this one. So this will be 45 times 10 divided by 3. We end up with 150. So in this case, 150. And let me check the calculation again. So 45 times 10 divided by 3 is 150. So let me rewrite it. In this particular problem, we're looking at x is equal to 150. Let me write it as a sentence. And I'm just going to basically incorporate it into what's given here. So 45 is 30% of 150. That's going to be your sentence. And that's it for this problem. Once again, the instructions say to solve using any method. So we could have done an equation. I just wanted to give you guys an example where we're using proportions. And if you're using proportions, you do have to take into account the percent. In this case, because they mentioned 30%, 30 over 100 has to be equivalent to 45 over the unknown, since it's 45 represents the amount, the base is the number. That's it for this problem. Let's take a look at another one, and we'll set it up also as a proportion. So in this case, we're going to be setting up x as a percent. So let x is equal to a percent. And then the actual proportion that we're going to be creating, and let me write it as proportion. Well, in this case, what percent is 85 of 17? So technically, if we go back to this this setup, you're gonna have 17 on the top and technically 85 at the bottom, so which is gonna be your base. So this will be 17 over 85. This has to be equal to technically x over 100. Since technically we're looking for the percent that 17 will be equivalent. And then in this case, all we have to do is multiply by 100, multiply by 100. And let me flip it so that we have the x on the proper side. So x is equal to 17 by 100 divided by 85. And let's evaluate this. So 17 times 100 divided by 85, we're looking at 20. So in this case, we're looking at 20. X is equal to 20. and then writing it as a sentence, we can say that 17 is 20% of 85. And that's actually it. And typical problems of percentages, they're not going to have instructions to solve it as a proportion. This is just another tool that we could use. The majority of problems will work perfectly fine as we set them up as an equation. For example, like we did problem A, which I have on a different file, the regular equation would work perfectly fine. So that's it for these set of problems.